Hello and welcome to another MaltaToday interview. Over the past weeks, we have been reporting on Budget 2026. 2 weeks ago, we interviewed the Finance Minister, Clyde Caruana. Last week, we interviewed the finance spokesperson from the opposition, Agent Dalia. But now that we've heard what the politicians have to say about the budget, we are going to move to what the economists have to say about the budget. And to help with that, I'm joined by Economist JP Fabri, who writes as well with Malta Today about the economy. And we're going to explore a bit the measures, the economic problems of today, and maybe the need for productivity shifts and that sort of thing. So JP, thank you for being with us today. So I guess it makes sense to start off with some questions about Budget 2026. In an opinion piece that you had written for Malta Today, you described the budget as one that trades fiscal margin for social stability. Do you think that's a sustainable strategy, or do you think Malta is relying a bit too heavily on short-term comfort here?
Yeah, I think we're pretty much at a crossroads as an economy. It is evident that over the past few years, the government's main aim was ensuring social stability, supporting families, I would say protecting them within the external crises that were happening. So we had the fuel, the wars, and all of that, whereby also because of COVID, government was very focused on ensuring that purchasing power remains strong. So I think in this case, the budget is a continuation of that trend, right? So we've seen tax cuts, we've seen other increases in pensions, in social allowances. So we're seeing this continuation and this, I would say, maybe too much focus on ensuring domestic demand, domestic consumption, right? So, and this most probably has been one of the main economic drivers of our results. Now, to be honest, the economy has been performing well, right? When compared also to our other European peers, Malta has always sustained high average growth rates, very low unemployment. So we've been on a very good upward momentum. But when we look beyond the numbers, we're seeing that the main contributor has always been strong consumption. Now, I think the economy needs to shift much more to higher productivity, higher value added, and to ensure that we remain resilient to the changes that are happening externally and that will continue to happen, right? We now need to really focus on the structural challenges because the Maltese economy has a number of structural challenges which it faces, from low fertility rates, from productivity, from over-reliance maybe on third country nationals, which the economy requires. So it's not a luxury. Ultimately, it's a need. So we are now within this transition phase, right? Now, for this transition phase or this transformation to happen, which is more of an economic renewal, then I think that we need much more bolder, ambitious, cross-cutting reforms that might hit some pockets, but are necessary for the long-term sustainability of the economy.
Do you think that the budget for next year has started to address these structural issues that you've spoken about?
I think that the budget is not the beginning and the end of any economic debate, right? It's one in a number of economic documents. So there is a Vision 2050 that underpins everything. And then you have a number of other strategies that are coming on stream. So you have the labor market strategy, you have the migration strategy, you have a number of strategies that are in the pipeline or under consultation. So we need to see the economy or the economic model as being influenced by a whole number of policies and strategies. I think what remains missing in the country is this holistic plan. I mean, Vision 2050 sets the foundations for that. It's still under consultation. Consultation closed a couple of weeks ago, so we're still waiting for the final version to be released. But I think there is scope for much more coherence, holistic vision, and strategies coming together, right? So I would like to see something which is more layered, maybe, with a discussion of what are the aspirations for Malta, what are the values that are going to underpin the next phase of growth, and what are the missions. So I think we should start addressing the economy from a mission-oriented perspective, right? Because the challenges are cross-cutting, they're structural in nature, right? So what would be the missions? And an example of a mission would be smart mobility, population, TCNs versus natural fertility growth, which will take time. So I think I'd like to see much more of this more broad-ranging, holistic, structural discussion happening.
So you had pointed out that Malta's fiscal strength is, it's built on population growth, especially foreign labor inflows. Now, to what extent is this an economic strength or a structural vulnerability in a sense?
Well, it's two sides of the same coin, right? So we've seen an economy that has grown in particular sectors, which has necessitated the need for inward migration. Now, this is not something that happened only in Malta, right? If we look across all Europe, this has been happening in other countries as well. And the fertility issues are not something which are Maltese only issues, but they've been an ongoing problem for all Western and first world economies. So this is also part of the general transition that happens in an economy. So as we continue advancing, then there are a certain of much needed jobs, very much the manual, the technical, which the Maltese or the highly Western countries then will substitute for higher value as a result of more educational opportunities and all of that. Now, the main challenge is going to be, how are we going to sustain our level of growth, our level of income, which has been increasing, which has converged to the European averages, with less resources? And that becomes a question of productivity, right? So how are we going to enhance our value added, our value creation from using less resources and not more? But there are going to be areas that require human resources and, as a result, TCNs. So we can't live in this fable that the economy will not require TCNs, right? So even if we're looking at population demographics, the country is aging, and it's going to remain that way. The question is, who's going to take care of our elderly? Are they going to remain being cared for in homes, in the community? Whatever model we're looking at, we require human resources to take care of those. And the next question is, are there enough Maltese within the pipeline, students going into these professions? So as you can see, even if we discuss fertility, even if we discuss population aging, it's a whole layered issue that starts not only from if we are making more children, but the pipeline of students. Is it enough to sustain that growth? Are they choosing these professions? If not, who's going to care for them? So it's a very delicate debate. And we have seen in Europe the rise of populist politics taking very easy said or portraying utopic visions of a society that unfortunately does not match reality, because the hard facts are what they are. The population is aging, fertility is going down. So and that's why I say that the economy is in a process of transition, transformation, and renewal. So it's going to be something that takes time. It's going to be something that is much long-term in nature, and that any initiatives that we plant today or any measures that we introduce today cannot be short-term in nature. The short-term fixes are getting more TCNs, but the long-term fixes need to take a span of time, 5 years, 10 years, to actually bear fruit, right? So if there's going to be a baby boom, we're only going to see the benefits of it after they finish education, which is in 18 years from today, you know? So we need to broaden our mindset of policy making, electoral promises in a couple of months or years, right? So we need to broaden our horizon. And unfortunately, I think the debate has been captured very much by short-termism. So that is why I think we need to elevate the debate a bit more, and hopefully Vision 2050 starts at least setting in motion this broader horizon than we currently have.
You mentioned this element of the short-termism in certain political debates, so to speak. We see that a lot in the very recently transport debates, debates on metro or underground, overground tram systems, this sort of thing. On transport, I mean, there was criticism on the budget that maybe did not address this particular reality, that a lot of people are stuck in traffic morning, after work, hours of the day. How can this particular issue be addressed? It's something that affects the economy, traffic, at the end of the day.
Yes, I mean, and I think one and I'm going back to Vision 2050, right? I think one of the main things that Vision 2050 is doing is that it's anchoring the debate beyond traditional economics. So we have a fixation of GDP rates, unemployment rates, but at the end of the day, those serve or should serve a higher purpose, which is well-being, quality of life. And I think Vision 2050 seems to be anchoring the debate much more around this quality of life. So transport is definitely one of the biggest frustrations that everyone faces on a daily basis, and actually hurts our productivity, our competitiveness, and a host of other things. But even here, it is not merely an infrastructural debate. It is not merely an economic debate. In essence, I call it a psychological debate, because unless we start nudging people effectively to make the transition, right? We can build metros, trams. I mean, we've had it so good for so long, in the sense that we're lazy, right? So if it were for all the Maltese, would find a car right beneath our door, park right beside our office. So unless we nudge human behavior away from private transport to public transport, we can basically build all the infrastructure we want, but we will not reap the true benefits. And unfortunately, I think the political debate in Malta has made the nudges, ergo taxes, sound like the pest, you know? So, and there's no beating around the bush. Unless private transport becomes extremely expensive, then mass transit will most probably remain unfeasible, right? So, and this is something that did not or does not happen in Malta alone, because sometimes I believe I have a tendency that we're unique in this world, right? Or we live in a bubble. But if we look at other countries, similar size, or else even larger land area, but similar density, Singapore, Hong Kong, it's exorbitant to have a private car, and no one would imagine to have a private car, just the very few. So, and this is going to be something that needs to be debated seriously, maturely, properly, away from any electoral discourse or manifesto. So that is why I really believe that it would be great to see a multinational political pact whereby these structural challenges can be tackled head-on for the benefit of the country, with decisions which will have, obviously, an impact in the short term, a negative impact, but will pave the way for a better quality of life. So, and I think the statistics came out this week, more than 40 new cars come onto the roads every day. I mean, the island is what it is. It's not growing any bigger. So unless we have the equivalent, actually more than that, cars getting decommissioned from the roads, we're facing a sure gridlock, you know. So the discussion needs to be curbside parking fees. I mean, everyone goes abroad, everyone drives abroad, they're used to it, no one complains. Why do we have to be the only country that doesn't have it in the world? Registration fees, it needs to be expensive. I mean, today we have families with 1, 2, 3 cars. The expectations when you're 18 that you have a car. You know, so these are cultural mentality. So unless we get into the psychological thinking of nudging, and nudging is actually won 2 academics a Nobel Prize in economics, you know, so it works. It's tried, tested. Unless we nudge people away from private use of transport to public transport, then the problem is going to remain. But in parallel, then we need to have a public or a mass transit system that works perfectly. Now it can be a bus system that, you know, we have loads of buses, feeder buses going around regularly, that as soon as you go, within 5 minutes you find a bus that takes you there. So it has to be a multimodal system. So ride-hailing as well. Even this of ride-hailing, and it's going to push me back to the debate of TCNs. I mean, we're seeing an increase in demand of ride-hailing of around 20% per year. But supply is being restricted. So what is the end result going to be? Higher waiting times, higher fees, and an incentive to move away from ride-hailing to private. You know, so everything is interlinked. Everything is layered. Everything is interwoven into each other. So unless we tackle things holistically, so the discussion of TCNs, the discussion of taxes, nudges, infrastructure, we're going to remain with a fragmented, or rather than fragmented, we're going to remain with these structural challenges literally weighing us down to be a version which is less than what we can be. And I think that will be the biggest frustration, because if we really want to, Malta can be even better, can be much better than it is. I mean, for heaven's sake, you know, we're a small rock at the end of the day. We're not talking of a huge land mass. So we can be much better than we are, both from a quality of life, from a well-being point of view. I mean, the economic numbers sustain our well-being, but the challenges that we face now make us actually, I wouldn't say not only question, but really should make us renew our economic model.
Mm-hmm. You said at the start of this question sort of that tax has been made out to be some sort of like plague on society, which is funny because, as you're saying, tax, it can be a good way of nudging people into maybe away from certain behavior more than anything.
Same with nutrition.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
so it's interesting because even tax has also always been seen as part of like a social pact in a way that, you know, I pay tax not just to receive services myself, but also to make sure other people are able to receive services like healthcare and that sort of thing. Do you think maybe this narrative around tax as being an inherently bad thing, I understand why maybe politicians would want to push this narrative, but does it maybe straitjacket the government in the future from maybe solving certain measures with a bit more, maybe not necessarily ambition, but maybe with a harder
yes, I think ultimately the economy is subservient to humans, right? So, and humans by nature are driven by incentives. We avoid pain, we prefer pleasure, you know. So and this is where I think the political maturity needs to come again. As you know, as you said, tax at the end of the day is not a plague. There are some taxes which are necessary, needed to start shifting behavior. Now, if Malta has one of the highest rates of obesity, cardiovascular disease, which at the end of the day, most probably, if a proper longitudinal study is done, can be traced to bad nutrition choices. So, and we've seen some nudges, the Fish Fridays, for example, right? It's a positive nudge. It's not a negative nudge. But unfortunately, humans react much more to a negative nudge than to a positive nudge. So I think what might eventually make sense is that the negative nudges, these taxes, the money collected is ring-fenced then for improvements in that particular area. So if you're talking, for example, about a nutrition tax, then those funds are ring-fenced for sports infrastructure, for improving access to food security, you know. So I think people need to see then the direct benefit of the money being taxed into being given to them then in a positive externality or in a positive way, you know. So it's a shift that will take its own time because unfortunately, as we discussed, taxes have become a new plague.
Now to move a bit to the topic that a lot of people are talking about, which is productivity. Especially when we're getting into economic debates, it's always about the productivity problem. Why do you think Malta has had such an issue here? In the sense that, you know, we have seen major GDP growth, unemployment levels are always a record low. Despite all this, why is productivity such a problem?
So I think the debate of productivity came as a result of the good economic metrics. Why? Because the economic metrics have been more volume-driven rather than value. And now people are feeling the strains of a volume-driven model, right? So people are talking about, let's call it the population density, the traffic, maybe the high tourism numbers and the type of tourists. So we've been surrounded by volume-driven growth. So as a result of that, the next phase is going to be how are we going to keep our economic results, if not improve them, just to make sure that our quality of life improves as well, right? So how are we going to do that? And the only way is to start transitioning more from a volume-based to a value-based. And from an economic point of view, that transition from volume to value can only be done by sustaining productivity growth. In simple terms, it means producing more with less, right? Or producing more with what you currently have. So you're not adding more inputs to the mix, you're actually extracting more value from your current inputs, or else you're reducing your inputs but improving your value. And that can happen. Now, I would say that a very good case in point for maybe people to really, because productivity is something which is elusive, you know, you can't really pin it down. It's something which is abstract, but it's all that matters in the long term, right? So it is the only driver that will sustain improved living conditions, quality of life, wages, and all of that. Now, a lot of economic debate from the academic side always says that, you know, AI, technology, but in reality, when it comes to hard evidence, which is metric-driven, the evidence is sometimes weak on how much technology really influences. So what we really need to do is start thinking of improving the type of economic sectors, economic drivers. I think the best way to describe it in a word is most probably how do we sophisticate what we currently have, right? So unfortunately, we have a tendency of always maybe new economic sectors chasing the next new fad or what is going to be the next new economic sectors. In reality, it's what we've been doing well, right, that stood the test of time. What we need to do is improve on those. So, and the case in point, I think, that happened recently is the case of ST, right? So ST came to Malta way back. Most probably I wasn't even born myself when it came here, as a very low sophistication assembly plant, very manual driven. This week or 2 weeks ago, there was a semiconductor conference in Malta, and ST announced that it's going to become one of the most advanced plants in Europe when it comes to semiconductors here in Malta. So ST came as a low sophisticated assembly plant to today, over the course of so many years, right, decades, becoming one of the most sophisticated centers of excellence in Europe. So rather than this discussion, this chase on the next new thing, I think what we really need to do as a country is, listen, what have we been doing well for so long? What has stood the test of time? And how can we revamp it, reinvent it for the needs, not only of today, more importantly, of tomorrow? So if a case in point, shipping, asset registration, let's call it asset registration. So we've started with the maritime register, which today is one of the largest, the top 3 in the world for ships. We've moved that to yacht. We've moved that to aircraft. And today we have Ryanair, we have private jet. You know, we're there amongst the best in the world when it comes to these asset registrations. The next big thing is going to be space. Like it or not, the next most probably global war is going to be around space rights, right? So how can we now reinvent the registration of assets that we have used so well for ships, for yachts, for aircrafts, for satellites? If we look at the amount of satellites that are being literally thrown up into space, it's huge. And countries are already capitalizing on that, like Luxembourg. So when we talk about space, it doesn't mean that we're going to start shooting rockets from Ein to Fiha, you know? But how can we use what we already have, which is our regulatory framework? So we have a professional class, which is really good. lawyers, accountants, auditors, we have an ecosystem that works. Now, how can we apply to that, to the next big thing, which is space, but using our own regulatory framework that has worked so well for assets? The same with insurance. I mean, today we have protected cell companies that are amongst the best out there, but space assets need to be insured as well. So how can we amend existing frameworks that we have and use so well for sectors that are employing thousands of people, but prepare them for the next big thing, space? Another case in point, for example, we say that Malta is brilliant at, and it is, as a film location, as a gaming studio. We've now moved the gaming into game development, esports, and we've seen a number of announcements coming in. But then we have some very good IP structures as well. We're looking at extracting more value from our tourists. But if we look at all of these, what can these elements be used for a new economic sector which is growing at an intense rate? This economic sector is the creator economy, right? And we're seeing creators building economic empires that are driving IP, and they're branching out into games, into film studios, into theme parks. So how can we, as an island with such enviable climate, attract these global content creators to be based here, develop content here, at the same time market Malta as well, right? So rather than chasing this new, we seem to be addicted to what's new. We've been doing things really well in some elements. So how are we going to transition those into the new growth paths? So I think the debate needs to be more of a renewal rather than a rebirth or building something from scratch. So I think this mentality of renewal, transformation, transition needs to be percolated much more within the economic discourse and the political narrative as well.
Part of the concern on productivity is also education, whether as people we have the skills to maybe drive innovation in these sectors. Do you see this as an issue?
I think this is, if I had to go back to my previous point on missions, right? I think one of the biggest missions that this country needs for the long-term sustainability, not only of its economic model, but of the quality of life, is a rethink of our educational system, right? Because ultimately, we have to be cognizant of the huge changes that are happening in the technology space, right? So, and it's only going to become even more impactful in the years to come, quantum computing and all of that. But the question is, are we preparing our students, our kids, for the new world? I would say no, right? And it needs to be a complete revamp of the way exams are carried out. And I think what becomes critical in today's age is not information. It's not about remembering. I mean, when I was young, I had to remember poems. It's useless. And our kids today have the access to tools, and even government is incentivizing the use of AI tools through courses. But that becomes useless, if not counterproductive, to the type of human resources that the country needs. So we need an educational system that is big on creativity, which is big on critical thinking, which is big on communication. So, which is also big, and I think this is where everything, most probably, I wouldn't say everything, but there are significant failures in inclusivity, in the sense that how do we make sure that all students, to the best of their abilities, and we need to be cognizant that not everyone is within that educational ladder that will become STEM graduates, for example, but we need to go back and make sure that also students with learning disabilities, for example, can, because evidence shows, for example, that they are very good when it comes to the creative arts. So what have we seen in the UK? In the UK, we have seen the concept of studio schools becoming a central pillar of an inclusive education that actually recognizes that the traditional academic paths are not for everyone, and it's fine, and it's good. But it gives the equivalence of academic certificates through more technical, creative things. So you have studio schools for autistic students that prepare these kids for music production, theater design, and all of that. So I think this is where we need a rethink. And we need to look at what's being done elsewhere. So the Scandinavian models, which, if I'm not mistaken, there are no exams before the age of 10. And they're all dabbling in music, in DJing, in creativity, in art. Yet, they are the best performers in STEM. So, they're doing something right over here. Here, we're still fixated with these bloody exams. Why? In a day where AI is going to augment our knowledge. I'd rather have kids that are able to stand up, speak, communicate, critically assess the information, because the problem is an information overload. So what we want is people with skills to critically digest, know what is right and what is wrong, assess, give their opinion, be creative about expressing their opinion, be creative about solving problems. And that is where I think the biggest mismatch comes, but also at the same time having a very strong technical vocational skill part, because we need to accept that not everyone is going to become a graduate. And the economy, and in fact, the founder of NVIDIA a couple of months ago actually said this, that in the years to come, right, one of the most paid jobs out there are going to be the manual workers, because they're going to be in demand, but scarce in supply. So if we see as well, for example, what the Italian government did in its COVID recovery plan, is actually invest heavily in vocational and technical schools. And I think in Malta we're missing that, because most probably what MCAST was originally taught out to be now has a life of its own, which is, I would say, less vocational and maybe more on the academic as well side. But we need the rebirth of these technical vocational schools, and even at primary level, we need to start exploring these different educational institutions, like what is being done in the UK through the studio schools, to make sure that education is as inclusive as it can be for everyone, irrespective of their abilities.
Now, to move on to something a bit different now, which is debt, because this sometimes comes up as an issue that the public debt has exploded, although the ratio is very well below the 50% of GDP. Having said that, it has still crossed 11 billion euro. Is this still a comfortable position, or is the comfort zone smaller than it seems, sort of, in public debt?
I think the discussion needs to be much more focused on fiscal space and as well similar to the economic transition, right? So even here, the discussion on government spending rather than on quantity, we're spending X, and we have increased our expenditure from X to Y. It needs to be on the quality. What are we getting out of that expenditure, right? So, and I think this debate on debt, I mean, debt inherently is not bad, right? Everyone goes into debt, and there is no growth without debt, right? So even if you look at a family, which is the single most, or an individual, which is the single most economic unit that there is, goes into debt to grow, buy a house, invest in a business. So debt should equal growth. The problem becomes if debt is there to sustain our current expenditure, right? Now, for us to have a really meaningful debate on debt, right, and this fiscal space, I think that even from a government accounting, we need to improve the information out there, the information that is collected and the way it is presented. And over here, we need to speak much more on the net worth of the government, because debt ultimately, true, it's a liability, but it's one of many liabilities, right? And the government faces a whole lot of liabilities, and some of them are actually intergenerational. So pensions, and we talk about the pension time bomb, which I think needs much more, I wouldn't say debate, because we've most probably debated it for the past 15 years, and we know that the time bomb is there. We just need now much more action in the sense of things being implemented. So I think when we're talking about debt, we need to have a much more broader discussion with evidence on the net worth, on a real consolidated balance sheet for government. I mean, in the public sector, the balance sheet is everything, right? When we're assessing a company's health, we don't look at the profit and loss. In reality, we look at the balance sheet. But in government, the balance sheet is fragmented. So we have balance sheets of corporations, but then of government. With all these assets and all these liabilities, we don't have one balance sheet. And there can be a discussion on the net worth. Is it increasing? Is it going down? I think the only country that does this is New Zealand. It has done it, and in fact its budget system is, I would say, the golden standard, because they actually have a well-being budget as well. But they talk on net worth. So, and I go back to my original point, we're in transition. And I think we're in transition on many fronts. And hopefully we start talking about a layered vision as well, because we have a tendency of being very fragmented as a country, operating in silos. We talk about debt, but we don't look at the quality of spending. We talk about spending, but then we don't have impact assessments or post-spending evaluations. Listen, did this program work or not? If it didn't work, fine, scrap it. We'll change it. What are the feedback mechanisms into the budgetary process? Are we throwing money at a program that doesn't work? Or are we seeing that if we shift our spending from this program to another program, the results will be better? So, as well, it's easy to say, debt is increasing, or is it... Yes, but we need much more. And I think this is something that most probably spans all the issues. Sometimes we're too superficial in our assessment of the present situation and also in terms of discussing the solutions for the future. And I think we owe it, not only to ourselves, but we owe it to the next generation, right? We need to elevate the debate. We need to be a bit more mature because the challenges are there. And when the challenges hit, we've been resilient. So Malta is a tried and tested model of resilience. But it doesn't mean that we can remain complacent. Because what is happening out there in a world which is becoming ever more interconnected, and most probably the polarity is increasing, right? Even from a geopolitical point of view, what we're seeing is that the vulnerability is also increasing because the intensity of shocks are much harsher. And the frequency of shocks is also increasing. So in our lifetime, we've seen a financial crisis, a pandemic, a war, more than one war. So both the intensity and the frequency are increasing, which means what? That resilience is not only about the ability to bounce back, right? That is the direct resilience post-shock. What we need is readiness. The shocks are going to continue happening. The crises are going to continue happening. The question is therefore, are we ready for those? And that is where we cannot be complacent, because if we were ready and resilient for a shock that happened 5 years ago, the nature of the shock that is coming next is going to be different. And it doesn't mean that we're ready for that. And the readiness is something which is constant, which needs constant nurturing, grooming. And I think this is where we need to maybe face the challenges more head-on, and therefore have the difficult conversations, right? And rather than the difficult conversations, actually implement the difficult things. Because ultimately, it's only the difficult things which will make us stronger. We can't continue hiding away from the things that hurt. Because ultimately, if we do run away from those, one day, the shock will hit us. So readiness means the courage to take the difficult decisions today to actually prep us for tomorrow.
I think that's a very good place to end the interview. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was very insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you for following this interview with us. You can follow all our other interviews on our website at MaltaToday Co Ltd, as well as on our social media pages of ours as well. Thank you.